Strong schools make strong communities. Most Americans go through the public school system, and we know a good education is essential for getting a decent job, supporting a family, and contributing as a citizen in our democracy.
But did you know that almost all other states spend more per student on education than California? In fact, in recent years, California has spent nearly $3,500 less per student than the national average.
In every other state, teachers, librarians, and guidance counselors teach and support fewer students, so each student can get more attention. Why is this? How do schools in California get their funding, and who decides how much? Most of the money for schools comes from the taxes collected from people and businesses. You pay sales tax on the items you buy, income tax on the wages you earn or the profits a business makes, and property taxes on buildings and land.
In an average California school district, state and local property taxes make up about 80% of school funding.
Whereas the U.S. government, the lottery, and local revenues like interest and fundraisers make up the rest. The amount of money your local school district gets is linked to the number of students in each grade, certain student characteristics, and student attendance. When students are absent a lot, schools lose money. So how come California schools don't have enough money? Let's take a look at how schools were funded in the 1970s when California schools were considered to be excellent, and per-student spending was consistently above the national average. Local property taxes made up 60% of the funding for schools, and the state contributed about 34%. Then, in 1978, Proposition 13 was passed, which slashed property taxes by an average of 60%. Limited property tax rate increases for residential and commercial property, and eliminated the ability for school districts to increase their property tax rates for school programs. Quickly, school funding in California fell below the national average, and a few years later, in 1988, voters passed another law, Proposition 98. This law provides a protected portion of the state budget for schools, and when the economy improves, school funding improves with it. Unfortunately, 2 years later, Proposition 111 modified Proposition 98 to include provisions which allow the Proposition 98 guarantee to decrease in years when the state budget shrinks.
Even after all of this, California per-student spending was still well below the national average. In 2012, CTA, Governor Brown, and many others supported Proposition 30, which provided a temporary modest increase in sales tax and an increase in personal income tax for very high earners. Due to the recent passage of Proposition 55, we successfully maintained the increase in personal income taxes for high earners until 2030. California schools avoided drastic cuts and have seen significant funding increases due to the voters' support for these propositions. But even with the gains made, California schools are still funded below the national average.
How do we get more funding for schools? Clearly, Proposition 13 hurt public school funding, and it has never really recovered. Proposition 98 gives schools a guaranteed portion of the state budget pie, but the state budget isn't always reliable. What can we do about it? Voters and the public need to rethink Proposition 13. Most people don't realize that before Proposition 13, commercial and residential property taxes were about evenly divided. Today, residential property taxes make up over 70% of the tax revenue from property taxes. That means people, not businesses, are paying more of the taxes, and that was never the stated intent of Proposition 13, keeping Grandma from losing her home when property values soared. How do we grow the state budget revenue pie? Close tax loopholes, expanding the tax base, increased economic development, increasing tax rates.
Everything should be on the table for discussion about how to make sure the sixth largest economy in the world can support the public services its citizens want and need.
Remember, well-funded schools with successful students are a public good and help build strong communities. Understanding how California schools are funded can help you become a better advocate for students and your community.